The universe, as it turns out, operates on a rather straightforward principle. Everything wants to eat, absorb, or otherwise violently rearrange everything else. This cosmic food chain had been mapped, cataloged, and color-coded by the Intergalactic Threat Assessment Bureau with the same meticulous care that lesser civilizations might reserve for organizing their sock drawers. At the very top of this hierarchy sat the void Devourers, reality-munching entities that treated entire star systems as appetizers. Just below them lurked the quantum predators, followed by the Nightmare Collective, then the standard collection of galaxy-conquering warlords, planet-cracking monsters, and species-ending plagues. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly sensible arrangement that had served the known galaxy well for approximately 14 million years. Every sentient being understood their place in this grand scheme of cosmic terror, and more importantly, they knew exactly what to be afraid of, and in what order, which made the current situation at Nexus Station all the more perplexing. The hegemony's finest xenobiologist, a Krillian whose chitinous exoskeleton had survived direct exposure to 7 different Apocalypse-class pathogens, was currently pressed against the far wall of Docking Bay 7, trembling like a leaf in a supernova. This same individual had once calmly dissected a living shadow creature while it screamed in 17 dimensions. Today, however, they were reduced to nervous clicking because a perfectly ordinary human had just walked past carrying what appeared to be a steaming cup of some sort of stimulant beverage. The human in question moved with the casual gait of someone completely unaware that they had just caused a minor diplomatic incident. They wore standard-issue civilian attire, nothing threatening there, and carried themselves with the unremarkable bearing of a mid-level bureaucrat who had probably never seen actual combat. Their most dangerous visible possession was a datapad that looked about as menacing as a particularly stern memo. Yet somehow this unremarkable specimen had managed to clear a 15-meter radius around themselves without saying a word or making a single aggressive gesture. The Nexus Station's AI, a computational entity that regularly processed threat assessments for cosmic horrors that could sneeze planets out of existence, found itself in the unprecedented position of being genuinely confused. Its threat detection algorithms had been cycling through their entire database for the past 3 minutes, desperately trying to categorize the human. The preliminary results were contradictory, to say the least. Physical capabilities, laughably inadequate, by galactic standards. The human possessed no natural armor, no redundant organ systems, no energy projection abilities, and reflexes that wouldn't impress a sedated gastropod. Technological augmentation, none detected, not so much as a basic neural interface or genetic modification. Psionic abilities, completely absent. The human's mental emanations barely registered above background noise. Toxic biochemistry, standard carbon-based metabolism, harmless to 97% of known species. Weapons, a stylus, and what appeared to be emergency ration bar of some sort. And yet, the Vorthak delegation beings who routinely negotiated treaties with sentient plagues had collectively decided that the opposite side of the station was a much more appealing location the moment the human had emerged from their transport. The crystalline ethereals, whose entire species communicated through controlled radiation bursts that could sterilize small moons, had dimmed their natural luminescence to barely perceptible levels and begun communicating in hushed photonic whispers. Most telling of all, a pack of Fenris wolves, creatures genetically engineered to hunt void spawn and who considered charging headfirst into eldritch nightmares a form of recreational activity, had taken one look at the human and collectively decided that now would be an excellent time to investigate the fascinating floor patterns in an entirely different section of the station. The human, blissfully unaware of the minor exodus their presence had triggered, approached the information kiosk with the determined stride of someone who had important bureaucratic business to conduct. They smiled at the holographic interface, a gesture that somehow managed to make the AI's quantum processors stutter momentarily, and spoke in the perfectly reasonable tones of someone requesting directions to the nearest restroom. "Excuse me, but could you point me toward the diplomatic quarter? I'm here for the Interspecies Cooperation Summit." The AI's response protocols, which had been designed to handle everything from homicidal artificial intelligences to reality-warping cosmic entities, found themselves completely unprepared for such a mundane request delivered by something that was simultaneously registering as completely harmless and utterly terrifying. Certainly, the AI managed, its voice carrying just the slightest electronic tremor. Level 15, Section Delta. The main conference hall is clearly marked. Wonderful, thank you so much. Oh, and is there somewhere I can grab a proper meal? The transport food was absolutely dreadful. This innocent request somehow managed to cause a minor panic among the nearby gastropod collective, whose members began secreting defensive mucus at an alarming rate. The AI, drawing upon vast databases of diplomatic protocol and threat assessment procedures, could find absolutely nothing in the human's words or demeanor that should logically trigger such a response. The food courts are located on level 8, it replied, wondering if this was what existential crisis felt like for artificial minds. Perfect. You've been incredibly helpful. The human departed with the same unremarkable gait that had brought them here, leaving behind a station full of beings who collectively represented some of the most dangerous intelligences in known space, all of whom were now trying very hard to pretend they hadn't just spent several minutes cowering from someone who looked like they might have trouble opening a particularly stubborn jar of preserve. The AI spent the next several nanoseconds, an eternity in computational terms, trying to reconcile this contradiction. Its databases contained detailed files on species that could weaponize mathematics, beings who hunted through folded space-time, and entities that existed as pure malevolent concept. None of them had ever caused this particular reaction. Meanwhile, in the depths of the station's most secure vault, a nightmare collective specimen that had been contained using reality distortion fields and quantum locks began exhibiting signs of unusual agitation. The containment system's sensors detected elevated stress hormones and neural activity patterns, consistent with what could only be described as anxiety. The human was heading for the diplomatic quarter, carrying their perfectly ordinary beverage and their devastating completely unaware that they had just accomplished something that no cosmic horror, eldritch abomination, or galaxy-threatening catastrophe had ever managed. They had made the monsters afraid. The diplomatic quarter of Nexus Station had been designed by the finest architectural minds in the galaxy to accommodate beings whose very existence challenged conventional physics. The main conference hall featured reality-stable flooring for entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, atmosphere processors that could maintain 17 different environmental conditions in the same room, and structural supports rated to withstand beings whose emotional states could affect local gravity. What it had not been designed for apparently was one perfectly ordinary human walking through it while humming what sounded like a tune from their homeworld's primitive musical tradition. The Astral Confederacy's representative, a being of pure energy who had once negotiated a ceasefire with a sentient black hole, found themselves involuntarily dimming their photonic matrix as the human passed their delegation's table. This was particularly embarrassing considering they had spent the morning session calmly discussing containment protocols for a dimensional rift that was currently eating its way through the Andromeda Galaxy's outer rim. The breach is expanding at approximately 3 parsecs per standard cycle, the energy being had reported with perfect composure just moments earlier. Current projections suggest it will consume roughly 47 inhabited systems before we can implement the proposed reality anchor. 47 civilizations potentially facing extermination, and they had discussed it with the clinical detachment of someone reviewing quarterly profit margin. But now, with the human settling into a nearby chair and pulling out what appeared to be a simple writing implement, their entire energy signature was fluctuating like a nervous teenager. The human, meanwhile, was having what could only be described as a perfectly pleasant conversation with the Hive Mind Collective's diplomatic drone. The collective, whose distributed consciousness spanned roughly 12,000 individual bodies across 7 star systems, had faced down reality storms, dimension-eating parasites, and at least 3 separate apocalypse-class events in the past decade alone. They had never encountered anything they couldn't analyze, categorize, and ultimately understand. Until now. I hope you don't mind my saying, the human was remarking with genuine warmth, but your coordination protocols are absolutely fascinating. The way you manage information distribution across such vast distances while maintaining individual node autonomy, it's really quite elegant. The drone's compound eyes flickered with what might have been panic. Across 7 star systems, 12,000 bodies simultaneously experienced what the collective's analysts would later classify as existential uncertainty. Here was a being complementing their most fundamental biological processes with the casual appreciation one might reserve for a well-designed garden. It was simultaneously flattering and utterly terrifying. Your interest appreciated. The drone managed, its voice carrying harmonics of distress that rippled across the collective's entire network. Oh, I've always been curious about different forms of consciousness. The human continued, apparently oblivious to the minor crisis they were causing across multiple star systems. Take the ethereals over there. The way they process information through controlled radiation is just brilliant. And don't get me started on the quantum processors. The mathematics behind their predictive modeling algorithms must be incredible. What the human had just described as curious interest was causing a minor diplomatic incident at 3 separate tables. The ethereal's radiation patterns were spiking erratically. The quantum processors were experiencing cascade failures in their probability matrices. And somewhere in the back of the hall, a representative from the Terror Syndicate beings, whose entire culture was built around the systematic cultivation of fear, had quietly excused themselves and was now hiding in a maintenance closet. The irony was not lost on the station's AI, which continued to monitor the situation with growing bewilderment. These same beings had spent the morning session discussing the entropy cult's latest attempt to accelerate universal heat death with the same emotional investment one might show while debating lunch options. The cult's plan involved weaponizing the fundamental forces of thermodynamics across roughly half the observable universe, yet the assembled delegates had reviewed the threat assessment reports while casually sipping their respective beverages of choice. But now, faced with one human asking politely about their biological processes, and offering what appeared to be genuine compliments about their evolutionary advantages, they were exhibiting stress responses that their species' xenobiologists had previously thought impossible. The situation reached peak absurdity when the human noticed the dread hegemony's ambassador attempting to slowly edge away from the conference table. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I in your way?" the human asked with perfect sincerity, actually standing up to offer the hegemony representative more room. The dread hegemony's ambassador was a creature that had literally evolved from nightmare itself. Their species had spent millions of years perfecting the art of existential terror, had conquered 17 galaxies through pure psychological warfare, and maintained their empire through the simple expedient of being so utterly horrifying that rebellion was literally unthinkable. They had stared down cosmic entities that existed as pure malevolence and had negotiated territorial agreements with the personification of entropy itself. They were currently paralyzed with what could only be described as social anxiety, because a human had offered to move their chair. No displacement necessary, the ambassador managed, their voice carrying undertones that had once caused an entire star cluster to surrender unconditionally. Now those same harmonic frequencies were wavering like an amateur vocalist with stage fright. "Are you sure? I really don't mind moving. Oh, and I meant to say earlier, your quantum morphic adaptation protocols are absolutely ingenious. The way your species has managed to maintain individual consciousness while existing in a state of controlled reality flux is just remarkable." The ambassador's response was a sound that roughly translated as "please make it stop" in several dead languages. Across the hall, emergency protocols were quietly being activated, not for any cosmic threat or interdimensional incursion, but because the collective stress levels of some of the galaxy's most dangerous beings were approaching critical thresholds. All because one human was being aggressively pleasant and professionally interested in their biological capability. The AI found itself in the unprecedented position of having to classify enthusiastic appreciation as a potential diplomatic hazard. Then the emergency klaxons began to sound, and everything got considerably worse. The emergency began, as most galactic crises do, with someone pressing entirely the wrong button at precisely the worst possible moment. In this case, a junior technician aboard a nearby research vessel had accidentally initiated a containment breach while attempting to recalibrate their coffee dispenser, a mistake that would have been merely embarrassing under normal circumstances, but became considerably more problematic when the thing being contained was a Class 7 reality disruptor. The Disruptor, for its part, was absolutely delighted to be free. It immediately began doing what reality disruptors do best, systematically unraveling the fundamental laws of physics in increasingly creative ways. Gravity began flowing sideways, time started hiccuping, and several sections of Nexus Station found themselves temporarily existing in alternate dimensions, where the color blue had never been invented. The response from the assembled delegates was swift and professional. The Astral Confederacy's representative immediately began generating containment fields. The quantum processors started calculating probability matrices for optimal response vectors. And the Dread Hegemony's ambassador began emanating fear-based reality anchors to stabilize local space-time. Even the Hive Mind Collective coordinated a 12,000-body response pattern across 7 star systems, all while maintaining their usual air of competent cosmic dread. It was, by all accounts, a textbook emergency response from beings who regularly dealt with universe-threatening catastrophes as part of their daily routine. Then the humans stood up and asked if they could help. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Astral Confederacy's representatives' containment field flickered and nearly collapsed as their energy matrix destabilized from pure shock. The quantum processors' calculations went haywire as they tried to factor helpful human into their probability matrices, and came up with results that violated several mathematical principles. The Dread Hegemony's ambassadors' fear-based reality anchors began generating the wrong kind of existential terror entirely. "I'm not sure there's much you can do," the collective's drone managed, while across 7 star systems, 12,000 bodies collectively held their breath. "This is a Class 7 reality disruptor. It requires specialized containment protocols. And oh, those are tricky," the human agreed cheerfully, pulling out their datapad and scrolling through what appeared to be fairly standard technical specifications. "But I've dealt with similar dimensional instabilities before. Have you tried a resonance cascade inversion? Sometimes the simpler approaches work better than the complex one." The silence that followed this suggestion was the kind of silence that typically preceded either enlightenment or apocalypse, possibly both. The quantum processors were the first to break. Their primary calculating matrix began smoking. Actually smoking, despite being composed entirely of crystallized mathematics, as they attempted to process the concept of a human casually suggesting a solution that they hadn't considered. The resonance cascade inversion was a technique so elegant in its simplicity and so devastatingly effective that it had never occurred to them to try it because it seemed too obvious that it might actually work, one of them admitted, their harmonic voice carrying notes of what sounded suspiciously like admiration, mixed with existential horror. The human beamed, a facial expression that somehow managed to be both genuinely warm and utterly terrifying in the current context. "Would you like me to help set it up? I have some experience with dimensional resonance calibration." What followed was perhaps the most surreal crisis response in recorded galactic history. The reality disruptor continued its enthusiastic destruction of local physics, while some of the universe's most feared entities found themselves taking instructions from a being who looked like they might struggle with particularly complex can openers. "Just adjust the harmonic frequency by about 3%, the humans suggested to the Astral Confederacy's representative. "And maybe try inverting the polarity on your quantum field generators. Sometimes they get stuck in default configuration." The energy being complied, their photonic matrix flickering with what could only be described as nervous excitement. The suggested modifications worked perfectly, which was somehow more terrifying than if they had failed catastrophe. The Dread Hegemony's ambassador found themselves in the unprecedented position of receiving tactical advice about fear-based reality manipulation from someone who radiated all the menace of a particularly content librarian. "Your existential terror resonance is excellent," the human observed with professional appreciation. "But have you considered adding just a touch of temporal displacement anxiety? It really helps with dimensional stability in my experience." The ambassador implemented the suggestion without thinking, their millions of years of evolved nightmare instincts temporarily overridden by what appeared to be genuine expertise. The result was a fear-based reality anchor so perfectly calibrated that it would later be used as a reference standard by the Galactic Terror Engineering Institute. The Hive Mind Collective found their distributed consciousness being gently reorganized by someone who treated their fundamental biological imperatives as an interesting logistical challenge. "You might want to try parallel processing on nodes 7 through 15, the humans suggested, apparently reading their coordination patterns like a technical manual. It would give you better response distribution and reduce the computational load on your primary consciousness matrix. 12,000 bodies across 7 star systems simultaneously experienced the mind-bending realization that a single individual, a creature with one brain, no network redundancy, and processing power that wouldn't impress a basic navigation computer, was casually optimizing systems that represented millions of years of evolutionary advancement. The worst part was that all of their suggestions worked. The reality disrupt faced with a containment field that had been optimized by genuine curiosity rather than just fear and technical competence, found itself being systematically out-engineered by beings who were receiving real-time coaching from someone who treated cosmic horror as an interesting technical problem. "There we go," the human said with satisfaction as the disruptor was successfully contained within a reality bubble so elegantly constructed that it would later be studied by dimensional engineers for the next 3 centuries. Teamwork really does make all the difference, doesn't it? The assembled delegates, beings who had just successfully prevented a reality cascade that could have unraveled local space-time, found themselves staring at the human with expressions that ranged from grudging respect to outright existential crisis. They had saved the station. They had prevented a dimensional catastrophe. They had worked together with unprecedented efficiency and coordination, and somehow the human had made it all seem perfectly reasonable and straightforward, like they were helping neighbors move furniture rather than containing universe-threatening anomalies. The AI's threat assessment protocols finally gave up entirely and classified the human as helpful with a subcategory of absolutely terrifying, and a special notation that roughly translated as "do not anger under any circumstance." In the aftermath of what historians would later term the Nexus incident, or that time everyone learned why humans are scary, the assembled delegates found themselves in the peculiar position of having to process an experience that challenged their fundamental understanding of cosmic hierarchy. The debriefing session, conducted in the station's most secure conference room, had all the atmosphere of a support group for recovering cosmic horror addicts. "Let's review what we know," began the Astral Confederacy's representative, their energy matrix still flickering with residual stress patterns. The human demonstrated expert-level knowledge of dimensional engineering, reality manipulation, and fear-based psychic constructs. They optimized our containment procedures with casual suggestions. They treated a Class 7 reality disruptor as if it were a minor technical inconvenience. "Don't forget the smile," added the quantum processor delegation, their crystalline forms still showing hairline cracks from computational overload. They kept smiling throughout the entire crisis. Who smiles while containing universe-threatening anomaly? The dread hegemony's ambassador rippled with involuntary fear responses. "In my species' experience, beings who remain cheerful during apocalyptic scenarios fall into 2 categories: the hopelessly insane, or the unutterably dangerous." The human displayed no indicators of mental instability. This observation sent uncomfortable ripples through the assembled group. The hive mind collective's drone twitched as 12,000 bodies across 7 star systems collectively shuddered. "Our distributed analysis suggests a third possibility," the collective offered, reluctantly. The human genuinely found the experience enjoyable. They appeared to derive satisfaction from collaborative problem-solving and technical challenges. "Our behavioral models indicate they would have been equally enthusiastic about helping us organize a charity fundraiser." The silence that followed this assessment was pregnant with implications that none of them particularly wanted to examine too closely. The station's AI, having finally managed to compile a preliminary threat assessment report, shared its findings with the kind of electronic reluctance typically reserved for delivering bad news about terminal illnesses. "Analysis suggests that human threat levels cannot be adequately measured using conventional parameters," it announced. "Standard threat assessment focuses on destructive capability, aggressive intent, and survival advantages. Humans appear to operate on an entirely different paradigm." "Explain," demanded the Terror Syndicate's representative, who had finally emerged from their maintenance closet hideout. "Humans appear to be optimized for collaborative enhancement rather than dominance hierarchy. They instinctively seek to improve existing systems, share knowledge freely, and derive satisfaction from collective achievement. In essence, they are designed to make everything around them more effective." The implications hung in the air like a particularly ominous cloud formation. "You're saying," the Astral Confederacy's representative ventured slowly, that humans are dangerous because they make us better at being dangerous. Worse, the AI continued with what could only be described as electronic despair. They make you better at everything. Analysis of historical human interactions suggests they have an uncanny ability to identify inefficiencies, propose improvements, and motivate others to exceed their baseline capabilities. They don't conquer through force or fear. They conquer through optimization. The ethereal's radiation patterns shifted to frequencies associated with deep philosophical unease. But that would mean that every species they encounter becomes more effective, more capable, and more successful than they were before human contact. The AI confirmed. It's a form of conquest so subtle that the conquered species genuinely believes they've benefited from the interaction, which, technically, they have. The hive mind collective's drone went very still. Our preliminary calculations suggests that prolonged human contact could result in exponential capability enhancement across all participating species. The galactic power balance could shift dramatically. And they do this, the Dread Hegemony's ambassador asked in horrified fascination, without any apparent awareness of the effect they're having. Correct. Human behavioral patterns indicate they genuinely believe they are simply being helpful and friendly. They appear to view collaborative improvement as a natural social behavior, rather than a conquest strategy. The Terra Syndicate's representative made a sound that roughly translated as existential whimpering. So they're accidentally conquering the galaxy through aggressive helpfulness. That appears to be an accurate assessment. Meanwhile, in the station's main cafeteria, the human in question was having a perfectly pleasant conversation with the catering staff about potential improvements to the food distribution system. They had already suggested 3 minor modifications that would increase efficiency by roughly 30% and reduce waste by half, and were now enthusiastically discussing the possibility of introducing some traditional human recipes that might appeal to a broader range of species. The cafeteria manager, a being whose previous experience had been limited to feeding cosmic horrors and interdimensional nightmares, found themselves genuinely excited about menu planning for the first time in their career. Back in the conference room, the assembled delegates were grappling with a revelation that challenged everything they thought they knew about galactic power structures. So what do we? Asked the quantum processors, their mathematical minds struggling to calculate probabilities for a scenario that defied conventional threat modeling. We classify this information as cosmic-level restricted, the Astral Confederacy's representative, and we very politely ensure that humans continue to feel welcome and appreciated throughout known space. Because making them angry would be catastrophic? No, the AI interjected with what sounded suspiciously like admiration mixed with terror. Because making them motivated to actively help us on a galactic scale would be even worse. The uncomfortable truth settled over the assembled delegates like a particularly heavy blanket of existential dread. They had spent eons establishing themselves as the most dangerous, most feared, most capable entities in known space, and now they had encountered a species that could make them better at it. The human, having successfully revolutionized the station's meal service, and made several new friends in the process, was already planning their next helpful contribution to galactic civilization. The universe, as always, remained blissfully unaware that it was about to become a much more efficient and terrifying place.